Hi there, I'm Paul Thomson. I'm a composer and I also co-founded Spitfire Audio. I'm here with Christian Henson, my business partner in Spitfire Audio and the other co-founder, and also with Andrea and Becca McLeish from Mind Body Creatives, a team specialising in helping people in the creative industries find ways to work positively with stress. So we're here today to talk about mental health. May the 18th to the 24th is Mental Health Awareness Week. 1 in 4 people will experience some kind of mental health challenge in their lifetime, and feeling isolated can exacerbate or trigger mental health issues. Now, as songwriters and composers, we can be often relatively isolated in the way that we work, even at the best of times. And currently, we are not in the best of times. So we're going to talk today about what we can do to help ourselves when we feel like we need help. So I'm going to throw the floor open, first of all, to Andrea to give you an introduction, and then to Becca. So Andrea, take it away.
Hi. I work as a cognitive hypnotherapist, as does Becca, and we met a few years ago when we were doing our training. My background prior to that was in the music industry. I worked as a manager with a bunch of internationally successful artists, and what I came to understand from that is that in the music industry in particular, or it appeared to me, good mental health wasn't then a priority. I know things have changed in the last few years, probably even in the last 5 years. And it seems to me that there's a lot that can be done and a lot more that can be spoken about. So I'm really pleased to be able to do this today.
Great. And Becca?
Hi. Andrea and I met while training as cognitive hypnotherapists, and I have my own practice in Hertfordshire, mainly dealing with confidence and self-worth issues. But I previously worked in television and am all too aware of the stresses that come from working in the creative industry. So again, I'm really happy to be here and to be able to give some ideas and solutions that might help.
Thanks, Becca. Christian here. I'm also a composer and co-founder of Spitfire Audio with Paul. I also have a YouTube channel and speak to a lot of other composers. And I think one of the real themes that has arisen during lockdown is how similar our lives are and how actually we've been self-isolating for many, many years. I'm fascinated by the fact that there seems to be a separation in certainly the medical world of physical health and mental health. But as far as I'm aware, the brain is inside our body. And I wonder why there is that separation and why it is we find it difficult to define what is good mental health when we kind of know when we're looking after ourselves physically, in inverted commas.
Well, yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because there has been this idea for a long time that your mental health and your physical health are separate, and that you can treat one without treating the other. And actually, I don't think that's true at all. And then the current research shows that that's absolutely not the case. And you can think about your mental health, like your physical health, actually being a thing that you need to attend to on a daily basis. And it's going to change throughout your life. It's going to change according to your circumstances and your experience. And it's an aspect of your being that, in order to function properly, like your physical health, really needs you to think about how you treat it on a daily basis, what habits you have in your life that are going to make you mentally fit as well as physically fit. You can't sit around stuffing your face with donuts, lying on the couch all day and expect to have a body that's going to look after you. Equally, you can't do the same thing with your mind. You have to, with your well-being, you have to think about what you can do to help yourself. And that really is the point, ultimately, is that you do, unless you're suffering with a mental illness, which is a different thing to mental well-being, you have control over your mental well-being to a huge degree. And it's just being aware of that, being deliberate about your living and thinking consciously about the choices that you make each day.
So two of the biggest issues that people come up with, particularly now, are anxiety and stress. Now, anxiety and stress are often initially triggered by a perceived threat or fear, or simply a change to the status quo. Stress can best be described as our needs not being met, and anxiety as a fear of an unknown outcome. So changes like a deadline, change in job or difficult working environment can then trigger an episode. The current situation with coronavirus and lockdown is the perfect environment for stress and anxiety to develop. Whether you're financially comfortable or struggling to make ends meet, the state of living with so many unknowns can trigger anyone to feel that things are out of control. And this is then likely to manifest itself in feelings of stress and overwhelm.
Okay, so what I'm interested in knowing, what I'm interested in hearing about a little bit from Paul and Christian today is what particular challenges, particularly given what you were saying, Christian, before about how this doesn't feel that unfamiliar for you as a composer to be basically working in isolation, is what the challenges have been, what difference you've noticed in the last couple of months with this enormous kind of seismic shift in the way we're living. How has that affected your ability to work as a creative? And how different does this isolation feel to the isolation that you generally experience as a songwriter?
Well, I think a lot of it actually stems from being self-employed. And I think a characteristic, I won't generalise the entire kind of music making community, but a common characteristic is that we didn't choose between being quarterback or being football, captain, and being guitarists and keyboard players. We tend to be the kind of the outsiders sitting in our bedrooms practicing music. And as a consequence, I think there is an inherent self-confidence thing within the music community. And I think that what we learn is that by becoming self-employed and by driving our own careers, that by we are to a certain degree in control of our own fate, where we weren't in control maybe within our school lives. We were very much in a kind of beta position. And I think what happens to many of us, or certainly to myself and the people I've been speaking to, is that loss of control returns us to that kind of slightly subservient position that we maybe found ourselves in former lives. I've always believed, not in myself as a composer, but in my ability to outwork others. And suddenly not being able to work because the deadline isn't there anymore or the job has been put in hiatus has pulled the rug from under my feet in quite an alarming manner. What about you, Paul?
I think that there's two kind of quite interesting separate elements to this for me. The first is very similar to what you just described, which is part of the reason that I really kind of embraced the lifestyle and career of a composer was the ability to have control over my working hours. So if I wanted to take the kids out for the morning, do something, I could then work in the evening if I needed to and catch up on things. And so that was a kind of good way for me to feel like I was in control of my destiny. And the strange thing now is that while you still have the element of that kind of control, a lot of the control has been taken away, and that you can't do all the things that you would usually do to kind of free your mind from. There's an element to being a composer or a songwriter where you have to allow your subconscious to work on the problem that you're facing. So when you get stuck, you might pop to the shops, or you might do something that really just totally takes your mind off it. And I think that part seems to have been taken away, and it's not necessarily fully actually taken away, because you can still go out of your house and go for a walk and get some exercise. But there is the feeling that you can't do most of the stuff that you used to be able to do. And that, I find, does slightly impact on my ability to solve the problems subconsciously like I used to. The other element of it is, our job at Spitfire and the responsibility that you feel for all of the people who work for you. And that is quite stressful, because you feel that because there's only a certain amount of control we've got over being able to kind of look after those people and make sure they're okay. So we're at the mercy to a certain extent of circumstance and of the guidelines that we're being given by the government, and then trying to, with our fantastic executive team, trying to ensure that all of the people who work for us are kind of mentally okay as well. So that's the thing that I think has most impacted me in the immediate future. Christian, what about the long-term future? How do you feel about that at the moment? I mean, there's a lot of productions have been shut down, and there's no real clear sign as to when things are going to start to kind of start shooting again for composers. I don't know, studios aren't opening, so orchestral musicians are still in this kind of strange kind of stuck position. So what are your views about the long-term future for us?
Well, I'm quite excited about it because I think that things will change. And naturally, I think if there's anything that the music community is good at, it's very good at finding the nooks and crannies in order to deliver music. I think the one problem that the music industry always gets wrong is music itself is just a basic human need and not a luxury item. So I think that there will always be a need for it, a desire for it, both to make it and consume it. So I don't have fears there, but as you say, the loss of control I think is unnerving, and I think that will pass. Something I have seen is that productions are going into production if they can isolate the entire crew and cast, and I think that people start making things in different ways that I think is going to be quite exciting. We're not there yet, though.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's not dissimilar to what I'm hearing from most of my clients, which is really, broadly speaking, the idea that what's really getting at people, irrespective of what they do, is a lack of control and uncertainty about the immediate future particularly, but long term, the goals and ideas that you may have had 4 months ago now aren't necessarily going to be achievable. So, and we know that our brains like certainty. They like things to be predictable and to know what happens. So it makes perfect sense that lots of us are feeling much more anxious. And interestingly, those people who generally suffer with some level of anxiety are finding it easier than most other people to cope at the moment, because they're used to feeling like this and they're going, hey, now you've all joined my world. This is what it's like for me all the time. So what I'd love to hear from you, Paul and Christian, is what you, in the face of this loss of control and living with this uncertainty, what little things you're able to do for yourselves, or that feel really important for you to do and ensure that you do each day, that keep your head above water so that you can carry on being creative and getting your work done.
Well, it's interesting to say that, because actually I think that what Paul and I don't wish to speak for you, and I'm sure you will offer up examples, Paul, but certainly I know, as having worked as composers for 20 years, we've already developed coping mechanisms, as you suggest, for those moments of anxiety. And something that we've been sharing with our team of 17 now, very young people, is stuff that seems so obvious, which is like always leave the house, even if your place of work is the house. That sense of going to work seems to be a very, very important one. We've made the mistake, I certainly have, of working in my pajamas or working in my birthday suit even. And whilst the idea may sound kind of romantic and lazing around and having a chilled kind of work life as well as home, it doesn't seem to work after a few days, and it feels like, the way that I would describe it, it's kind of like sitting in a dirty nappy. It's perfectly comfortable, but it's not a very nice thing to do. So that there's those kind of basic things that I've been doing over the years help. I personally have just put a kind of an arbitrary thing on myself, and I'm photographing every sunrise between now and summer solstice, and it's become something I very much cling on to. It's really difficult because it gets earlier and earlier every day, so you're kind of losing those dog minutes that time in the morning. But for me, it's something I really cling to and really value, and it's a personal challenge.
I've got a similar thing of trying to make sure that every morning before I do any work, before I kind of do anything really, I try and get some exercise. So that might be going out for a run or a walk, or it might be actually not going outside, getting on an exercise bike for 20-30 minutes, which is kind of okay. I mean, I can see the countryside, so that's quite nice. But there is definitely a value in being outside for part of the day. If only because you get a good dose of vitamin D, which we're hearing is quite important. But just talking about the coping mechanism side of it, and that sort of kind of thing. One of the things that I've found really useful over the years, which is proving to be very useful at the moment as well, was I saw a program when I was young, with about composers, and there was a composer called William Matthias, who was also a professor of music at Bangor University, I think. And he used to say that he, apart from his tutorial sessions, he would sit at his desk from 9 o'clock and work. And then if he got to 5 o'clock, he could go home. And his aim was just to try and write. And he said some days he would only manage a couple of bars, and some days he'd be very prolific. But the point was that he said that writing was 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration, and that if you waited for inspiration to strike, you would basically sit around becoming more and more frantic and thinking that you were never going to be able to do it again. And it's that kind of blank page syndrome. And so, I think it's always easier to improve something that you've done rather than to try and create a masterpiece from nothing. So my tip would be, that made a really big impression on me. My tip would be that you just have to sit and do it. And then, even if you think that what you've achieved is not great, the next day you're going to be able to come back to it and improve it. And then you're part of the way towards finishing it.
That's really interesting, Christian. The whole sunrise thing is, it's your way, I guess, of taking control. So it's when things are out of control, it's like you find new ways to be able to take control and put in new things that will be able to point you in the right direction. We are responsible basically for our own mental health. And because as humans, we rely on certainty to feel safe. We need to know there's not a saber-toothed tiger outside our cave. That's the thing that creates anxiety and stress. And so if those things are taken away from us in one direction, putting in new ways to have control, however small they may be, gives us back that feeling of control. So that, that's a really great, any small thing that you can do every day that makes you feel good and makes you feel that you have some control and some stability. And you've put that in just off your own back just because it feels right to you. And some people, people don't always know that that's a thing to do. Anything that makes you feel good and that you can do on a daily basis that lifts your spirits and lifts your mood will negates feelings of anxiety and stress. Something that I think is important to think about is being aware of the symptoms of anxiety and stress, because they can come on us and we're not always looking out for them, and being aware of them can help us to then get them under control before it's too late. I mean, nobody does stress the same way. Some people might find that it's tightness in the chest or, tension headaches or whatever it is. But noticing those things and then being able to do one of the things that you do to get things in control again is the first port of call for controlling your mental health and being in control of it. So that's really interesting. How do you, both Paul and Christian, how do you notice feelings of stress coming on? What are your indicators that it's time to kind of take control? Paul?
I feel my thing, I'm generally quite a calm person. And then when I feel like things are starting to get out of control, I get a feeling I feel my heart racing, and I get a kind of feeling of rising panic, and it's kind of makes my thinking foggy. That's the primary kind of thing. I've
definitely within my family have evidence of people suffering from a general anxiety disorders, and I wouldn't say I suffer from that per se, but it does manifest itself when I am stressed. And it reminds me of when I used to smoke cigarettes. My first cigarette of the day, I'd get this overwhelming sense of anxiety that I couldn't attach to anything. So I'd simply then try and attach it to something, whether it be the tax bill or I'm going to run out of money. And that's what I find is I get this sense of anxiety, probably born of the situation we're in, which is the loss of control, everything we've been talking about. And what I then try and do is connect it with something. And I find that then affects my family, because what I'll be reacting to will be the fact that yet another Amazon order's arrived and how are we going to pay for that? Whereas actually that aspect of our lives maybe this week isn't worth worrying about. So it's those kind of irrational paranoias I create in myself as a means of codifying this just general sense of anxiety.
That's really interesting, Christian, you say that, because I used to have a similar thing with anger, in that I would wake up feeling really angry in the mornings and almost literally sit in my bed and look around the room and think, right, who am I going to hang this on? What thing am I going to hang this on today before I go storming out? Fortunately for my family, I don't have that anymore. But one of the things you can do if you feel like that, a really important thing to do, actually, is to learn to sit with it. And what's happened is that over the last however long, 50, 70 years, we've decided that stress is anything that we don't really like, is anything that feels like a hassle is called stress, and that we can't deal with it. And we know, because we've been told that stress is really bad for us. So when we feel stressed, and stress, now feeling angry feels like stress, feeling anxious feels like stress, everything that isn't easy, we've decided is stress. And we're constantly told stress is really bad for us. Actually, stress isn't really bad for you. It's completely necessary. And without it, your life would be awful. So a certain level of stress is an absolute necessity for everyone to lead a well-rounded, fulfilling, safe life. Stress stops you making a lot of mistakes and makes sure that without stress, you wouldn't hit the deadline, because you wouldn't be asked to get out of bed in the morning. You need a little bit of stress to get you there. So if we can do two things. One is learn to accept that stress is inevitable. Obviously there are levels of it, but if you can make that, if you can accept that it's inevitable, and then what you can do, Christian, when you were talking about having those feelings each day and kind of attaching them to anything to give them some meaning, actually, if you can take, it sounds really easy, but it really works. If you can just give yourself 5 minutes to sit in a room on your own and just have the feelings, instead of acting them out in the world, just let them go through you, sit with them, notice what they do to your body, notice how that makes you feel, notice how your heart rate goes up, how your palms get, whatever it is for you, and just wait for it to pass, because it will pass. We don't feel anything for very long. It's just not what we're built to do. You don't feel joy for very long, unfortunately, either. But once you accept, I feel stressed, what does that feel like in my body? It feels like this. Oh, that's interesting. And then you'll find yourself thinking, what shall I have for breakfast?
So it's very interesting. Is that a form of projection? Because I'm familiar with, I don't know, I have a family member who always says, I'm never depressed. I'm never upset about anything. It's like, no, because you project it out onto everyone else and make them feel depressed and angry. So do you think that kind of loss of control or that discomfort is you kind of ejecting that out and projecting it out and onto others, really?
I think that can happen. What I would say is that people who say they never feel anxious or depressed generally don't feel anything at all. So it's true to say there are people who don't actually get any feelings. They don't really feel any feelings. They think a lot of the time, and they think things rather than feel things. And we're all, it's a spectrum, and we all sit at either one end or the other, and most of us are somewhere in the middle. But if you're not feeling anything, if you're not having any negative feelings, then you're really unlikely to be having very many positive feelings either. And that would suggest to me some block. There's been a block at some point, because you don't feel able to cope with any feelings at all. So you just cut them all off. So what you would want to do then is I would say, get some therapy, obviously, as a therapist, but because really you want to be able to access the spectrum of feelings. You want to be able to feel really happy and joyful when great things happen. And if you're going to have that, you've got to accept that when bad things happen or don't go your way, you're going to feel awful. And sometimes you just do feel awful. I think the best thing you can do is allow yourself to feel awful, spend the day in bed if you have to. It gets boring quite quickly. You can't deny it. You can't deny anxiety. You can't bury bad feelings. You can, but you bury them alive, and they'll come back later, kind of like Jason in Friday the 13th, clawing up from the grave. So accept and allow, that's what I would say.
And I think probably for creatives, they will feel all the feelings, because that's where creation comes from. So you, to a certain extent, you just have to say, this is part of what I do, and harnessing it and using it to the best of your abilities within your creations. And if you can't, as Andrea say, just let it go, feel it. I don't particularly like public speaking. I get those feelings, I let them wash over me, I know what they are, I know why they're there. They're there because I care. Usually those feelings are there because you care, you give a shit about the thing that you're about to do. But if you can let that happen and let that go, then, you know, it as Andrew said, none of it will last. So, you know, just go with the feeling is kind of the best advice to give. And as Andrew said also, if it doesn't go, then get some help.
That's interesting you saying about public speaking, Becca, because that's I chose to be a composer, not so that I could stand on a stage and give talks and do a lot of public speaking. And unfortunately, as a founder of a music technology company, I've had to do that. And Christian, who's much better at it than I am, gave me a brilliant piece of advice immediately before something, which was, in half an hour, this will all be over. And it actually made me feel really calm. All of a sudden, I was like, actually, yes, I can just let it go.
That was totally off on a tangent, but that was actually one of the secrets to me giving up smoking. I did a smoking cessation course with some analysts, some therapists rather, and they just said, you know, it's going back to what you were saying. The body isn't designed to sustain these feelings ad infinitum, and actually your pangs will only last for a maximum of 7 minutes or thereabouts. And that was very helpful to know that this sense, it's kind of like having a kid for the second time, knowing that certain stages are not going to last forever. That in itself, I think, is a great antidote really to the. I guess that when anxiety becomes panic, or indeed a panic attack, is when you get that kind of feedback loop. And I think by releasing yourself from the feedback loop, going, I feel this way and it will come to pass, I think in itself means that it doesn't manifest any greater kind of symptoms.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. That you referred to panic attacks there, Christian, because one of the things that we can do, that's exactly what happens, is that when you feel anxious, that feeling of anxiety is it's actually a physical feeling, is a response to particular chemicals that have been released in your body because something in your subconscious or conscious awareness has clocked something that's made you fearful. So you get a shot of adrenaline in order that you get ready to, you know, do whatever you need to do to get away from that thing. And when you become fearful of that feeling, okay, the shot of adrenaline the feelings from that last under a minute and a half. So if you just sit with it, knowing it's going to go, then it'll go and you carry on. If you feel that feeling and think, oh my God, that's not great, then you get another shot of adrenaline because you're scared of the feeling. So you become fearful of the fear and the cycle gets worse and worse and it becomes a panic attack. One of the ways that you can stop that, if that is happening for you, or if your anxiety feels like it's getting a bit out of control, is another really simple thing, which is just your breathing. And just looping back to what, Christian, you were saying earlier about your mind and body being treated as separate things. They're not separate. They're working together all the time. And what you do with your body tells your brain how you're feeling, and your brain then tells your body, oh yeah, that's okay. So it's working on this kind of loop. And when you're breathing, when you consciously slow down your breathing and take it deep into your lungs, so it's going down towards your stomach, not up in your shoulders, deep, gentle into your lungs, and make your out breath longer than your in breath. It's that simple. That tells your fear response, there's nothing to be scared of, calm down. We're breathing really slowly because we don't need to run. And your brain goes, oh, we're not scared, actually. So let's release some of those chemicals that say we're not scared and we're really relaxed and everything's fine. So you're deliberately telling your brain you're okay. And your brain just goes with that and then releases all the relaxing chemicals, which means your breathing calms down, and then you get on a cycle in the other direction. So just having a few little tools like that, stop, recognise the feeling, allow it to pass through. You know it's going to go. Use your breathing to get through it so that it doesn't escalate. Can be really, really powerful in the moment. And when we talk to people who are doing public speaking, these are the kind of skills that you can give them to just work with before, as you go on stage, or even while you're on stage.
Yeah, it's amazing to see how our bodies and minds are connected by using our calming breath. It shows us that we actually have a certain amount of control with all of those things to be able to guide our brain and so our mindset in a particular direction by using this simple state changer. We often think I'm feeling scared or I'm feeling sad as if it's like the weather. and we have no control over it, and it will just change with the current atmosphere. But that's not always the case. It's helpful to remember that in many circumstances, our state is malleable, and we've got the power to actually change the way we're feeling in the moment. There are different state changes for everybody, and different things work for different people. For some people, it can just be thinking about a calming colour. If you're feeling really anxious and you kind of think about a calming colour, and you can use it with the breath, so that think about that colour and breathe in that colour and fill your body with that colour. And before you know it, your blood pressure's gone down, your heart has calmed, and you feel calmer in general. Another thing that you can do, which sounds a bit bizarre, but it actually works, is if you're feeling flat or pretty negative, the 16-second smile is something that actually, smiling for 16 seconds has been proven to change the way we feel, to change our state. The action of moving the muscles in our face to a smile triggers our brain into thinking that we're happy. Even putting a pencil in your mouth, if you feel like a bit of a numpty, to make that face can make you feel happy. And the more often we do that, neuroplasticity tells us that every time we do that, our brain goes, oh yeah, I know, I'm happy. And so the more often we do it, the more often we feel better. So, it's another little trick that we can do to change the way we're feeling in the moment. There are lots of tricks that we can do to change the way we're feeling in the moment. It's just knowing them and using them regularly.
It's interesting, something that I've really witnessed a lot, just again speaking to lots of composers and looking at their social media feeds, is a lot of people saying that they're really struggling to write and to create, which I don't know about you, Paul, that is in anxiety inducing, because again, going back to this thing of us being self-employed, we connect creation with our livelihoods. Why do we feel people are maybe struggling to create, to feel inspired, to feel like writing something?
It could possibly be that that the structure that you're used to has been taken away from you. So finding new ways to get inspiration, like for instance you with your sunrises. I think now people are feeling like this is an enforced isolation, therefore this is not my choice, therefore, I've been forced, everything shuts down because it's like, this is not what I chose. So I think, maybe finding new ways to inspire yourselves, is kind of, is a good way to get things going again. And that can be particularly going outside in nature. And that's probably why you're going to the sunrises, is because some doctors are actually prescribing going out into nature for mental health issues, because it's what we need as humans, is to get into nature. Even looking up at the sky changes our mental health and how we're feeling in the moment. And I think also human contact is another thing that although as composers you often like to be on your own, as humans, we need human contact. It's what, we for thousands and thousands of years have done everything in a social group. And I think being aware of that and putting things into place to put those two things back into our lives, if we're feeling flat or not, being able to find our creativity are two ways that we can certainly kind of get that going again.
Yeah, another thing I'd like to add to that, I've been talking with some songwriters over the last couple of weeks on a different thing, and it does seem to be a little bit of a theme that anxiety gets in the way of, can get in the way of creativity, and generally that anxiety seems to be related to delivering either for a purpose or because it's your living, and suddenly, everything's changed. We don't know what's happening. People aren't getting paid in the same way and aren't able to work in the same way. And we've been talking about this idea of really getting away from those kind of external reasons for creating, getting away from the external reasons for writing or creating any bit of art. And that is to go back to why you started in the first place. that take some time to really think about this. Why did you start writing songs? What, why would you? Where did they come from? What did you get out of it? And actually, what it normally always comes back to is you did it for you. You did it often because it's a thing that just came out of you, and you don't really, like a writer, a novelist, you don't really have a choice about it. They come to you, they come out of you, and anxiety is blocking that. Life blocks that. And if you can find a way of going back to the person that began creating, and remember why they were doing it and the pleasure they got from it, and essentially do it for yourself. And if you can start doing it for yourself with all the reasons for doing it put away, forget about them. Just do even think, I'm not doing it for that. I'm not doing that project over there that I'm supposed to be delivering next Tuesday. I'm just going to write something for my own purposes because of the pleasure I enjoy from the process. Going back to the process, what you get out for it for yourself, what it means to you, and that tends to help get that creative spark going again.
I've got an idea as well. I think that's really great advice. The other thing that for composers, where you're dealing with technology as well as as opposed to kind of just pure creation where you might be sitting with a piece of paper or with a guitar or just with a pencil, quite a good way to kind of get yourself going is to try and incorporate some piece of technology that you haven't quite worked out yet into it. And it gives switches your brain over from trying to think of a great tune or trying to think of some amazing chord changes into trying to make this thing work, or trying to work out how you get through the menus to change some facet of the sound. And it just kind of bypass. It helps you not concentrate on the fact that you can't think of the next chord.
Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted us to talk about today is, we touched on this a bit earlier, but the idea of these daily habits that you can incorporate to kind of, ensure that your mental health is as good as it can be. And I'm just going to talk about some really basic things here that we all do all the time. We've touched on breathing, and how you can use your breathing to kind of regulate your anxiety levels. So just being aware of how you're breathing throughout the day, notice if it gets a little bit high or tight or fast. It takes 2 seconds to slow it down, and that will really make a difference. But also really basic stuff like sleep. Are you getting enough sleep? I can't tell you how many clients I see who, because I specialise in anxiety, who are suffering really badly with anxiety. And they're not sleeping. They're sleeping, maybe 6 hours a night or 7 hours a night, and they think that's okay. And the news is that's not okay. And if you're not getting enough sleep, you're not going to function properly. Now, there's this kind of idea that 8 hours is the right amount, and that's not true. And actually, for some people, 6 hours is fine. Some people need 10. So what I would say is get to know yourself, know who you are, and know what you need in order to function at your best. And if you need 8 hours a night, get 8 hours a night. Don't fall asleep on the sofa. Don't, make sure that don't have too much to drink if that affects you. Some people it does, some people it doesn't. Again, that's about getting to know yourself. So if you're getting enough sleep, you're going to be much better placed to make good decisions. You're going to be better placed to make good decisions about the things you put into your body, because what you eat and drink is going to affect your mental well-being as well. What affects your body affects your mind. So this is a kind of really basic thing that's going to have a huge impact on the rest of your day. And what I would say is there's a difference between being tired and being sleepy. So if you're sleepy at around 11 in the morning, you're not getting enough sleep. If you're tired at 6 o'clock in the evening, it's because you've had a busy day, presumably, or you've done a lot. That's not the same. So it just working out the difference, what you need to feel good, and make sure you do that and make it a priority.
It embarrasses me to say this, but I actually think I heard Joe Wicks being interviewed. This is the fitness guy, cooking fitness guy, being interviewed, and he said something I just thought was a really, really good bit of advice, and that is that he doesn't believe in this whole kind of dieting forever kind of thing that I think a lot of us do. We're all counting calories. What he's really into is providing yourself with the energy that's required in order to be active. And that to be active without the energy, the fuel that you're putting inside you, is really, really difficult. And so I've revised my approach to, I was on this intermittent fastings, which basically meant that I didn't eat before lunch, which basically meant that the daily morning exercise was incredibly difficult. Since starting this sunrise challenge that I mentioned about earlier, which, as I say, is getting 2 to 3 minutes earlier every day, I simply have to eat correctly in order to make it up the top of the hill that I photograph from. And I don't know if you would agree that that's a sound bit of advice, that maybe counting the calories isn't always the right way to go.
Absolutely. I think doing what's right for you and knowing yourself is far more important than saying, oh, I weigh this, therefore I should be taking in this amount of calories and doing this amount of work to burn off this amount of calories. I think, it's about being intuitive and knowing yourself, and also being aware of the things and being honest about the things that are not then good for you. So if you know that if you drink a bottle of wine before you go to bed that you feel rubbish the next day, or your joints hurt or whatever, equally, be grown up about it and say, that's probably not great for me. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but it just means don't do it all the time. And I think knowing yourself, one of the things that I often suggest to clients is to keep a diary. And I know it can sound a bit formal, but just keeping a note of the things that you've done in the day, the things that you maybe not being picky about what you've eaten, but just being aware of what you've eaten and how it's made you feel, and the amount of energy you've had and the amount of energy you've expelled, that sort of thing. Knowing yourself is really, really important. And I think sometimes there's a lot of noise out there, and we can not give ourselves the respect and the, within us, we know what is right and what's good for us. And you're doing exactly that by getting up and, your little ritual that you've now put into place is feeding both your mind and your body. You're doing both because you now have to eat at, a certain time to give you that. So you're doing it for yourself by going within and being mindful and knowing yourself, I think, is really important.
Stephen Fry said something that I think was also quite helpful in an interview recently. He said about accepting that there is less stimulation and take things a bit slower. And actually, this is your opportunity to read a book. Actually, particularly for people who maybe live in cities like Los Angeles, London, New York, we are incredibly stimulated. And surely that lack of stimulation is something that must be maybe disturbing for some people, but also what we try to do is replace it with other forms of stimulation, whether that be social media or this or that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And that can also have a huge effect on how you feel in your life. Social media's got, over the years, a really bad rap for being, and with good reason, for being a way of, just you working out on a daily basis how awful your life is in comparison to everybody else's, even though we all know that it's rubbish. I think at the moment that's become a much more useful tool. It's a way of people connecting and sort of connecting how they're feeling. We're making those social connections through social media because we don't have a choice. Half of us are spending our lives, way more of my time is spent on a screen than it would have been previously, which I would normally advise people against, but we don't have a choice. But what we do have a choice about is what we're seeing, so what stimulation we're getting. And one of the most important things you can do, I seem to say that about everything, but all these things are important, is be conscious of what you're surrounding yourself with. So if you do feel that need for stimulation, if you're not the kind of person like Stephen Fry that can sit and read a book, what are you looking at? What are you reading? Reading the news all day or consuming the news in one form or other is not going to be good for your mental health if you've got any sort of anxiety. Know what you need to know and deal with the stuff you need to know at a time that works best for you. If you're a lark and you get up early in the morning and that's when you have your energy, listen to the news then. Forget, take from it what you need and get on with your day. If you can't bear the morning, do it in the evening, whatever works for you. But the point is, choose wisely, because choose wisely the things that you read, the things you look at, and the people you talk to. Talk to people who are going to inspire you and make you feel good about yourself, who are going to be supportive. A supportive community, it can be incredibly good for your mental well-being. And avoid people who drag you down point out all the things that are wrong with you, or even are just negative about themselves all the time, because we tend to mirror what other people are doing, and then you get into a cycle of, oh God, is it really that bad for you? Well, guess what it's like for me. And you're telling, if you think about the fact that when you speak, you're telling your brain what's happening for you in your life. So if you're telling somebody else how awful things are that day, you're also telling yourself how awful things are, and your brain believes what you say. So try and think carefully about what you're saying, who you're talking to, what information you're putting into yourself, and that will also make a big difference.
I've got a thing that I just love to say, just with along that lines, is something I'm really analysing is how news has changed. Now, I've been reading The Guardian for 20 years now, and I have to accept, even though it has the same principles behind it, the way it makes me consume it is utterly different. Because basically I used to buy a piece of paper and I'd read it from the start to the end. And if by the end of that year of reading that paper, it had given me enough that I was interested in, I would carry on reading that paper. Today, that same publication has to make me click on things. And the way it's making me do that is by alarming me. And I think a lot of press has to alarm us. And I think that we have to accept that there are facts and there are opinions that we respect with it wherever we get our news. But its primary aim at the outset is to get us to click. And I think we have to understand that. And I think you were mentioning, Becca, about wine. I only take news with wine these days.
Yeah, I think, as we've said before, what we feed our brains, we're responsible for. It's the same as what we feed our bodies. And keeping our mental health in check is our responsibility. And we can all feel a bit wobbly sometimes. I think the old cliche of faking it till you make it is actually really helpful. And I think, just in general, think of the best version of you, the you on top form, the things that you do, the things that you eat, the things that you say, and the way you live your life, and turn up as that person every day, as often as you can. And before you know it, that just is who you are. You step into that role, but it's about being aware of the things that you're taking in, the things that are around you, and choosing to say no to the things that are not good for you.
Paul, we've had our partnership for many years now, and I've witnessed that you've had many kind of career crossroads over the last 10 to 15 years. And what I've observed is you working out what makes you happy. And is that something that you've been really conscious about? Because we all have our inner ambitions.
Do you know what? I think it is, but I haven't always been doing it. Maybe it's been partly conscious and partly subconscious. I think I've kind of chased after stuff sometimes, which I thought, this is what I've always wanted to do. I must get here. And tried to set things up to get to that point. And then occasionally at the last minute, I've kind of gazed over the abyss and thought, is that actually, I'm really not sure now that I want that. I kind of really wanted it, and now I'm just not sure. So I think that I've got quite a good streak of self-defense that kicks in occasionally and says, don't do that.
That was abrupt.
So I think that's we've had some great advice here today, and my overriding advice to anybody listening would be to be kind to yourself. Don't have such high expectations that you're constantly feeling disappointed in everything that you do. Allow yourself to be happy with your successes, and just with this, we're in a kind of unprecedented time. None of us have ever experienced anything like this before, and so we've got to allow ourselves a certain amount of latitude and just try and be positive and do things every day. As we've discussed, do things every day that make you feel good, and choose not to do the things that make you feel terrible. That would be my kind of takeaway from this. Thanks everyone for being here. I hope this has been really useful for everyone listening, and take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.